Hello and welcome to a new podcast episode of Nina's Apothecary. I'm glad you're back because I always want to shine a light on the latest trends from a scientific perspective. And since it's on everyone's lips again, today's topic is about apple cider vinegar. And, you know, I'm a big fan of such great, inexpensive home remedies. And when they actually do something, I'm all in. So let's dive right into the topic. And just before we start, if you have a topic that interests you, always feel free to write to me, always feel free to tell me. And then I will, of course, explore it scientifically for you and consider whether it could be a topic for its own podcast episode. And apple cider vinegar made it here, so let's get started. But really, apple cider vinegar has been used for centuries, and the big question now is whether it pops up as a trend from time to time, or can it really do something? One fact is that the Babylonians made fermented fruit juices into vinegar as early as 5000 BC and made so-called miracle drinks out of them, healing all sorts of things, including the ancient Egyptians and Greeks, including Hippocrates, who is kind of the father of new medicine, also used apple cider vinegar. So I think we're on a really cool path, and I believe it can do something. What do you think? In the Middle Ages, apple cider vinegar was really used as a cure-all to heal various ailments and diseases, but thank God we are at least not in the Middle Ages in medicine anymore. So first, an explanation of how apple cider vinegar is made. It's a two-stage fermentation process. First, the apples are crushed, then the juice is mixed with yeast, and that makes alcohol. So similar to winemaking, and then comes the second stage, because we don't want to make alcohol, we don't want to make wine. Then acetic acid bacteria are added, and then the vinegar is made. There is a filtered and an unfiltered version, where the filtered one is just really clear looking, and the unfiltered one is referred to as the vinegar mother. And we can imagine that if it's not filtered out, then we already have advantages again, because this so-called vinegar mother also contains some important bacteria and enzymes that are beneficial for our health. Chemically speaking, apple cider vinegar is a mixture of acetic acid, water, and some organic compounds, and it also contains some important vitamins, nutrients, and in this unfiltered version even more, such as more bacteria and germs. What does science say about apple cider vinegar? Unfortunately, still relatively little. There are a few studies, but they are all relatively small, because you have to imagine such studies really cost a lot of money. And of course, the apple cider vinegar industry, anyone who has ever bought apple cider vinegar or any vinegar at all, if it's not aceto balsamico from Modena that has been aged for 36 months somewhere, knows it's relatively cheap. That means there is no company behind it that could afford it, or that says, yes, okay, we're going to put all this money into it to set up really big studies, because there are very few financiers. But there are important studies, and I will now report to you in which areas apple cider vinegar, in which connection, also in which organs, for example, is positively associated. The first is now once apple cider vinegar and gut health. Apple cider vinegar has also been associated with promoting digestion, and I can definitely agree with that, and it has several causes and reasons. Because on the one hand, apple cider vinegar can improve gastric acid production. Now you're probably thinking, what does that have to do with the intestines? But we all know that digestion starts already in the mouth, how well we crush everything, how well we chew it, and then of course it goes through the esophagus to the stomach. And even if gastric acid is often demonized or perhaps troubles some people, especially with heartburn, it is extremely important, because it is needed to split proteins so they can be split into their components, where then the body can do something with it. It is also needed for the enzyme reactions, and it is needed, of course, also for good digestion so that carbohydrates can be split. And then, of course, it goes on, because if it is well split in the stomach, then it will be processed even better in the intestines. And then, of course, also if good preliminary work is done, the nutrients can be better absorbed through the gastric acid and then through the absorption in the intestines. I've already said carbohydrates. Also, the carbohydrates are, of course, split. Very, very important. If they are properly split, then I also do not have these blood sugar spikes, and also fat is of course split by gastric acid, and that is quite an important process, and that happens just when the milieu is right. And for example, apple cider vinegar also additionally stimulates bile acid production. And those who know my other podcasts and videos also know that an increased bile acid production can also lower cholesterol levels. Another advantage of apple cider vinegar in connection with our gastrointestinal tract, there are also experience reports but also small studies where it is said that, for example, bloating is improved, heartburn is improved, and also constipation. That means here too you can see that it can have or has many advantages, just like the intestinal milieu can be improved. So if it really went that simply, it would be great. We continue to look, why does it now have a good influence on our intestinal milieu, or can it have a good influence? Because especially with the unfiltered apple cider vinegar, many important bacteria and enzymes are there. And bacteria can also be something good. For example, we have a lot of good bacteria in our intestines, and when we nourish them with further good bacteria or with their favorite food, with prebiotics, which are also in the cloudy apple cider vinegar, then they are happy, and then they can continue to multiply, and then we have a good microbiome. Why apple cider vinegar has recently gained such great fame is because of the possible connection to blood sugar control. That means it is always said, if you drink apple cider vinegar in the morning or whenever and before carbohydrate-rich meals, then you do not have such blood sugar spikes. Your blood sugar level remains more constant. And we all know, or if you do not know, there is a separate blood sugar episode. That means definitely listen to it, because we have positive properties on our mood through that, on our whole well-being, especially on our weight loss desires, and also on our body circumference, on our fat reduction, and so on. That means if that were really true, it would be great. There are now a few studies that associate apple cider vinegar with reduced blood sugar spikes, and I will now briefly introduce you to them. Now, there is one study, a randomized controlled study from 2018, where people who already had type 2 diabetes were given 2 tablespoons of apple cider vinegar twice a day, and the same just as a placebo, which means they must have colored it somehow and made it taste similar to apple cider vinegar, only it wasn't. And lo and behold, the long-term sugar, the HbA1c value, improved significantly in those who got the apple cider vinegar. That means we already know. That is cool. Then there is another study where they gave it right before a carbohydrate-rich meal and then measured the blood sugar spikes, and they were significantly reduced in people who were really given the apple cider vinegar. This has the advantage for those who have not yet heard the blood sugar episode that with every blood sugar spike, our body is extremely inflamed, which is once a negative effect. Inflammation is always aging, always cells dying, and of course then a lot of insulin is released, and insulin just makes fat storage in our body. Then there is another study from 2015. It was also done in patients with type 2 diabetes, and they were given a tablespoon of the apple cider vinegar before going to bed, and then the next morning the fasting blood sugar was measured, and it was also significantly lowered. So I think that is really cool. As I said, these are all small studies that can never be as conclusive as very large ones. But I still think it's very cool, and I'm very optimistic about it. And I love anything that has to do with lowering blood sugar. And then if it is also something natural that is super cheap, all the better. Because apple cider vinegar apparently has a very, very positive effect on our blood sugar levels and also on our microbiome, we can already conclude that it is also good for our beauty, for our skin, for our hair, for our nails. Because if we do not have so many blood sugar spikes anymore, if our microbiome is working nicely, then our skin automatically improves. Also our appearance, our nails grow better, our hair is nicer. That means that's such a cool side effect. I want to point out once again that there are, of course, limitations with these studies, because just how this mechanism works, why the apple cider vinegar has such a positive influence on these blood sugar spikes, or also on our microbiome, that is not yet clarified. That means there is no complete scientific explanation for it. It is with many, many things, but also with many, many already long approved drugs like that. Probably then many people do not know. I always thought that in my studies, strange, okay, that's how it is, transmitted knowledge. And it is then automatically, if it has been conveyed for a certain time again and again, conveyed and used again and again for the same indication, and it works based on studies, then you do not need to have this scientific explanation completely, and it is still possible that it becomes a drug, for example. So with apple cider vinegar, of course, not the case. Just to emphasize that again, very important. And of course, apple cider vinegar can also have a positive influence on weight loss. And here too, I want to point out, it is not a miracle cure. There are simply no miracle cures. It can help you supportively. I think it's great. I personally drink it every day. Here are a few tips on how to drink it best. I drink it in the morning as the very first thing. I take a tablespoon, that's 15 milliliters, and dilute it in a half liter of water. Please, very, very important that you dilute it properly. You can, of course, also drink it with less water. We are lucky because we have these taste nerves and buds that tell us, anyway, stop. Before we poison ourselves with vinegar, important please, not that anyone thinks I'm taking the tablespoon pure, then we really have a damage to our mucous membranes and in our esophagus. So please definitely dilute. If you say, I don't like it at all, also dilute it. I don't like the taste of vinegar, then use it, for example, in salad dressing, in marinades, where it is combined with some oil or with other things. Maybe make yourself a smoothie out of it. I mean, I'm not so much a fan of smoothies, but then it's at least not so bad. Or you can also pickle vegetables. If you pickle them, you can also do it in apple cider vinegar, or for example also lentils, legumes. If they need to be soaked beforehand, you can also do it with apple cider vinegar. You can also use it to refine dishes, because sometimes in some recipes you also add a splash of lemon over it, in stews and curries, for example, because always such a little bit of the sour note also tastes quite good. Then you can also use a little bit of the apple cider vinegar, that we then also never have this cool effect, like when you take a tablespoon or also 2 tablespoons per day diluted. What I recommend with all new things, no matter how natural they are, that you start slowly, that you really start with a few drops once, or with a small teaspoon or a half teaspoon, and then you always go higher with the dose, so that you see once, do I tolerate it well? Does it do me good? Do I like it? Not immediately go in with the maximum dose. I think that is always a good tip, no matter what it is about. Very quickly, I'll tell you a few other possible positive benefits of apple cider vinegar. For example, it can improve cardiovascular health. The heart, for example, by stimulating bile acid production as previously explained, and thereby can act cholesterol lowering, it naturally also protects our heart. What also plays into it is also possible blood pressure lowering effect. I always say possible because, as said, it is all not 100% scientifically researched. Much of it is also based on experience reports and on this transferred, conveyed knowledge. An anti-inflammatory effect is also attributed to apple cider vinegar by having many healthy ingredients, contains polyphenols, and through this reduction of blood sugar spikes is alone already anti-inflammatory. So also they're really cool because, if we have many silent inflammations, even just one in the body, then it is like a small flame that always somehow causes unrest and always somehow brings the body a little into turmoil, and we do not want that. The really well documented and well researched areas are indeed the blood sugar topics, thereby also an increased feeling of satiety, thereby also increased weight loss, and also the anti-inflammatory effect of apple cider vinegar. What should or must be further researched, I do not know whether that will really happen, is just the other, where it's about cardiovascular health, about blood pressure, so where it really already goes into diseases. Science, of course, needs more time and more studies, probably also more money, but I think it's already really cool for us and everyday life. As I said, please pay attention to the quality. Organic should it be, cloudy, so this mother vinegar should definitely be. Then we have additional benefits for our microbiome, which is super cool. I will link the study and am looking forward to it. Please send me your photos with your apple cider vinegar drinks and tell me how it goes for you. I just think it's really cool. I love sour, and it is, when it's diluted strongly, hardly sour at all. So all that remains for me is to say thank you. As I said, if you have any questions, please write to me on Instagram, Nina Milenk. Please write to me on TikTok, Frau Apotheker, and approach me if you see me on the street. I am always happy. Just say hello. I am always very happy. Then we will take a photo together, and then I can answer your questions. I am always fully there, and now all that remains for me is to thank you and Kazi yourself.